childhood trauma and from the perspective of Islam. Tell me, what are your thoughts, broadly speaking?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. I think that you would be able to kind of give us a perspective being an emergency doctor. I'm sure you see all sorts of people who have different issues that are considered an emergency. So, for example, you've told me that there's a guy that ripped his earring in his ear and now he needs an emergency. There is another guy that broke his hand. There's another guy that's bleeding. So it could be a variety of different things. But how often is it that somebody is emotionally also hurt? Would you say, obviously I probably think that they don't come to an ER as often, but from a physician's perspective, do you believe that we've given enough importance to our physical existence just as much as we've given to our metaphysical existence, meaning our emotional well-being as well?
Well, that's a hard question, but I think I can best answer it by giving you my observations. What happens regularly in the emergency room, and that is, people come in with trauma of various types, of various ages. And if you think about it, the ER is a place where people are coming in and they're having the worst day of their life, one way or the other. And my job then is to make it a little bit better. Maybe make them feel better, make them reassured, relieve their anxiety, so on and so forth. When we talk about childhood trauma in the context of the ER, if it's ending up in the ER because of a traumatic issue, it's a bad thing. So for me, the worst things in many ways is near-death experiences, or even the death of a child and that the parent having to deal with that. There's often things that have to do with motor vehicle accidents where they've been traumatized, or I've seen a loved one pass away. Those are the extremes. It really happens every day in every city.
But what would you say within the compounds of the home, within the family, what is the highest level of, or the cause of the highest levels of trauma? Is it child abuse? Is it marital kind of issues? Is it domestic violence? What do you normally?
I think domestic violence is a big part of it. Domestic violence tends to occur now. That causes a lot of childhood trauma. But you actually have more emotional damage going on. Domestic violence, as in physical violence, does occur, but not nearly as much as the ongoing verbal or ongoing emotional damage that happens when there's a marital dispute or there's mental health issues.
So can you quickly tell us how that affects a child and both individuals involved in the marriage?
The child has, you can tell which kids have that, right? As they grow up, they'll tend to have avoidance, they'll have relationship issues, not only with the parents, but with their friends and stuff. What ends up happening often in these cases is that there's a tendency to seek out those who love you. And if it's not going to be in your home, it'll be someone outside your home who gives you that attention, who gives you that sense of comfort that you seek at home. When that happens, you have, as a parent, has no control over where they go and what kind of people do it. And sometimes there's plenty of people who will take advantage of that and use that as a manipulative way to make them feel that they're loved. And then so that happens.
It could be pedophiles, it could be all sorts of individuals.
We see a lot, at least in Houston, we see a lot of sex trafficking.
Yes.
And it's not exclusive to Houston, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
We see the introduction into prostitution. there's drugs, there's all of this stuff happens, and you know it's very easy to blame the kid or the young person, adult who's going into it. But just like anyone else, they're seeking comfort and freedom from the pain that they constantly
So,
seek.
which age do you think is the peak of us really feeling the results of childhood trauma? Is it teenage years? Is it 20s? Is it 30s? Is it 50s? Is it something ongoing for your entire life?
You know that is a really tough one. I probably couldn't tell you that. I'm not truly qualified to answer that question. One of the hardest things to do as a doctor is to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just have to.
No, it's understandable.
Yeah.
That's understandable. Well, I want to say this in the beginning of while building the introduction for our discussion is the month of Ramadan is a month in which we're meant to invite peace within our lives. That is why we find that we eat less, so we don't give so much importance to our physical existence, because we're eating 5 times a day, every day, throughout the whole year. This month, we say, wait, take a little break, slow down. Don't give so much importance to your body, focus on your mind and your spirituality, right?
5 times a day?
Well, some people eat more than 5, but but I mean,
Time for second breakfast. Yes.
3 times to 5 times, I think it's fair to say some people have. Now, when it comes to the month of Ramadan, we are looking to create a more spiritual, peaceful environment for ourselves. Whether it's eating less, thinking more, reading more, the Quran, spirituality, dua, seeking nearness to Allah, and even our family gatherings have a flavor of spirituality, right? Now, with that said, when I look at a lot of children who are hurt, a lot of adults who are in pain, a lot of marriages breaking up due to childhood trauma, I wonder if this is something that can be ignored within the month of Ramadan. Because if the month of Ramadan is part of creating a peaceful home with tranquility for the entire year, and discussing this topic is one of the most crucial things within the month of Ramadan. I believe that talking about divorce, talking about the trauma from divorce, that's something that needs to be talked about. Or poverty. Some people their childhood could be that they came from extreme poverty. And by extreme poverty, I don't mean we had to just buy 2 pairs of shoes for the whole year. That's not extreme poverty. That means you didn't have shoes when you were
I was used to, having traveled back and forth to Pakistan, I mean, what you see, or Iraq, you see as poverty there, and you come back and you're like, this is poverty. Poverty is sort of the, not being able to afford anything other than basically,
Not even, here in America.
In America.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I remember a few years ago, just prior to the month of Ramadan, actually some members from the Houston community, other communities had given a good amount of donations to our charitable project known as the Development and Relief Foundation. And we were in the making process, so we were trying to find people who were in need of sponsorship. And I kid you not, I have the videos, I think they're still available on YouTube, and I was thinking of actually putting them on once more. I went into this home, and it's not even a home, it's a room smaller than this room. It didn't have a roof, it didn't have a door. It was, the roof was just blankets, not blankets, plastic, okay? The actual door was a blanket. There was no bathroom, no electricity, no lights, no water, nothing in there. So we went there and we made an announcement that, look, if you have orphans or if you need a sponsorship, come out and we'll interview you and what have you. And I have this all on video. We went on with a crew. Out of this little room came out 6 kids. Eldest one was 6, youngest one was an infant. None of them were wearing shoes. None of them had food. Many of them, you can feel the malnutrition. They were sick, it was cold, they were, you can tell they needed. Now, does that not come with trauma?
Yeah.
That child, even if one day he grows up and becomes a physician, an engineer, an attorney, and lives in a beautiful home and that child will live with trauma.
So yeah, I'm gonna take an exception to that, to one degree, and that is, it's not that poverty that necessarily causes the trauma or being in that situation. It's the nutritional deficiency and the food lack of etc. But humans are designed to acclimate and be comfortable in whatever surrounding they have loved ones.
Okay.
So if all else is equal, being in a small place where I think many people will speak fondly of the time when we were all in one room and we had to sleep together, we were kind of, so it's not necessarily in and of itself.
I tell you,
it's
that
the
is
stuff that comes along with it.
I agree to some extent. What you're speaking is, again, an American definition of poverty. But this kid, believe me, that is why we have hadiths that if you make a barbecue at home, or if you have a good meal.
There's a hadith about barbecue?
Yes. Do you know that it's actually one of the most interesting stories, the Prophet Yusuf.
This is what happens when you do a podcast right before eating and you kind of go all over the place.
So this story, now that you've asked me, I think it's somewhat relevant. The Prophet Yusuf,
Yeah.
how they took him, they threw him in the well, he became a slave, he became, all that, his life. What we don't know is what happened a few days prior to his brothers kind of deciding we're going to take our brother and throw him away. They say that Jacob had a very big home, beautiful home, many children, many offsprings, very large family, and at nights they would barbecue. It wasn't that people had ovens and whatever, so the family would get together, they'd bring some chicken or meat, and they would barbecue. One day, a family came knocking at their door, and one of the brothers opened the door. He said, "This is the house of the messenger of God, and I smell this food every night."
See, that's what happens when you barbecue.
What happens to me
Could
and
be
my
addiction.
children? What happens to me and my children? And this young man, who was one of the brothers, says to him, "We'll give you, but just come back when we've kind of ate." He said, "But that's not good enough for me. You're going to eat the fresh food right off the barbecue grill, and you're going to give me what's left over." So he says, "Well, it is what it is." This guy leaves. The angel Jibreel comes to Yaqub. This is very important, and probably by design that Allah brought us to this discussion. It wasn't part of my discussion. Allah says, "Yaqub, you and your family should prepare for one of my greatest tests." And that's when they take Yusuf, and the whole family goes through years of tribulation. Now, why? Why? It's because Allah is just, Allah is fair. Do not create that trauma in a child because they don't have the ability. We have to be careful as well when we, with social media.
Yeah.
We have to be careful of how we show up to our local masjids and Islamic centers on Eid. Okay, let's say you have a very beautiful, expensive vehicle, and it's worth $500,000, and you also have a Toyota or an average vehicle, right? I urge you to please use the average vehicle when you go to community centers. Don't use your expensive vehicles, because a community center belongs to all. It doesn't just belong to the rich.
Yeah.
So now the adults will understand, but there's a child. He's 12 years old. His dad's driving a Corolla. You're driving a $200,000 vehicle, right? It could cause some sort of insecurities for this child. So again, not as close to the topic, but something that the month of Ramadan is the month of awareness. It's the month of becoming human beings.
So I'm gonna ask you a little bit about the trauma aspect from a Western perspective, or rather the immigrant Western perspective. When I was in school, I had, you have to fast during school day. You come back and you go during lunchtime and you get taunted at certain age groups. why, they said, come sit with us, sure you're fine, all right, if fasting, you can still sit, do it. And turn around and say, hey, what are you eating? Nothing, honey? So there is a certain amount of inherent ongoing psychological impact that happens with practicing your way of life if it's different in significant aspect from the prevalent way of life. So that was one sort of a silly example, but it was for real. But now you take it another way. Okay, so other aspects of it include having to go to school and to explain that, listen, as a child, I need to go to the bathroom and, well, I don't have a water source. All I have is paper towels. So now that means you're going to hold as much as you can, avoid going there because you're going to run into uncomfortable situations. And that is not to be understated in some ways that as causes. What else? What about food where your name, right?
Your name.
Yeah. The name that you carry, the food,
your mom picking
the
you up
availability
after
of meat
school
or
or the
not.
job.
Yep. A parent that comes in that has an accent or
Kids, yes. Kids going to like McDonald's after school.
Yeah.
Some kids, it's McDonald's, Burger King, whatever. They're hanging out after a game. And everybody, obviously, nobody's going to eat a fish fillet, man. You know how it works. Nobody wants to go for the McDonald's fish fillet. Now, everybody is ordering the Big Mac. You're the only one ordering the fish fillet. That, we look at it, and now we're older, we have self-confidence, and we're telling ourselves, what's the big deal? But for that child, especially if they have some self-confidence struggles, wearing the hijab, having Muslim names, not being able to eat whatever everybody else is eating in the cafeteria, not being able to attend the school dances, it could be that there is a show, for example, The Bachelor, okay? That's not an appropriate show for youngsters to watch, right?
Who would you say it's appropriate for?
Nobody.
Okay then.
But I'm saying, you end up going to school and everybody's talking, oh, did you see what happened yesterday? Did you? And this kid genuinely, not that he wants to watch or she wants to watch, but they do feel left out. So that does cause a little bit of trauma. So from what I understand.
But all these are older, now we're talking about a little bit older age.
Yes.
That these get affected.
Yeah.
So 10 bucks.
But okay, so let's divide our discussion into at least 2 segments. If you want to add, let's make it more. What is uncontrolled trauma?
Yeah.
Something you don't have control over. Okay, let's talk about that.
Okay.
And not being the product of that. Not saying, well, I was the product of this. And I'll get to this because I hear this a lot from people. I don't have control over my life. I didn't choose this life. And then trauma that we have some sort of control over. The situations now that we live in. Let's come to the first one. Has the Quran discussed trauma that, we don't have control over? Absolutely. This is why in the month of Ramadan, outside the month of Ramadan, we should come to every single possible theme and ask the Quran, this book that is alive, this book that never dies, this book that gives us the best advice as a way of life, and say, I have jealous family members. Does the Quran address this? Boom, it's right there. I come from a single parent family. Does the Quran address this? It's right there. I have, serious issues within my marriage, of betrayal and so on and so forth. Does the Quran address it? It's right there. One of childhood traumas that you don't have control over as a child was addressed in the Quran. The trauma that it has on the child and on the mother. The story of the Prophet Musa. This guy's an infant. He was just born. Allah inspires this woman. وَإِذْ أَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّ مُوسَى. We inspired the mother that do what? Take this baby, put him in a basket, put the basket on the Nile River. Now, can you imagine the trauma that, this is in Surah Al-Qasas, that a mother has to go through? Not knowing, okay, did I just destroy my own child that I buried in my stomach for 9 months? And this child, what's going to happen to him? He shows up at Pharaoh's palace. He grows up there. He knows they're not his real parents. You never had real parents, you know? So Allah discusses this in the Holy Quran. Now, as a child growing up, facing trauma with a family, Yusuf, that's the most beautiful story. Yusuf was very young when his brothers took him and they threw him in the well and he ended up as a slave. They sold him as a slave.
So, if I may ask you, how does these episodes give us a take-home message in managing today's childhood trauma?
Very good. So, a lot of people come to me and they email me or they WhatsApp me or text me or I meet them, all sorts of ways. And I believe that childhood trauma is one of, if I were to make a list of top 10 things that people talk to me about, one of them is childhood trauma. I want to say this part that you don't have control over, or your parents were poor. They didn't deliberately let you live in poverty, okay? You were refugees. They actually went through a lot of pain and difficulty to get you where you were, but now that you were there, you were poor, you were struggling. So things you didn't have control over, how should they resonate with you? Honestly, I feel that people should not let themselves become the product of their circumstances. Find a way to move on. Find a way to reconcile, to live with your past, and accept the fact that it was a difficult moment, it was a test, it was a tribulation, it wasn't pleasant, it wasn't milk and honey, whatever it was. But don't live your whole life thinking, and I'll give you an example. I can't get into medical school. I can't become a lawyer. I can't become a CEO. Why? Because I grew up in poverty. I didn't go to a good public school. I didn't go to a private school. I didn't have tutors. I didn't have this. I
So
didn't
you're
have
setting
that.
yourself up for failure.
So you're not, but your mind is manipulating you in a sense that it's telling you, look, this is where you are. You're going to end up being a manager at Walmart at best. And that guy, yes, he's going to be your doctor. He's going to be your attorney. He's going to be your CEO. And your mind kind of lets you accept the situation. Why? Because that kid went to a good private school. He had educated parents. He didn't have to, at night worry about dinner. His dinner was also there for him and all that. So now, with that, you say, okay, fine, I'll struggle. Maybe my kids can. Don't put yourself in that position. That's the first thing that I want to kind of address.
I think at the same time, there needs to be a recognition that a lot of what happens with childhood trauma actually changes the structure of the brain along the way. And for someone to encourage, and that's necessary. But let's face it, in those circumstances, you need to get the counseling that allows you to reformulate how you should think, how you can do it.
Absolutely.
So getting appropriate help is part of
That's
what
exactly
we should do.
yes.
And the reason I bring this up is because mental health issues, whether it's PTSD, depression, schizophrenia, etc., are such a taboo in so many of our cultures that so many more can be helped and then lead fruitful lives if people would support their need to get the help.
Very good. So that's exactly what I wanted to say. In order for us to reconcile with the past, we need professional help. And there's nothing wrong. For you to understand that you have had not an easy past compared to others, how do I understand it? How do I reconcile with it? How do I, why was I unlucky enough for my parents to go through a divorce? There's nearly 1 million divorces every year in America. 900,000, 970,000. Nearly 1 million families are split in America. You think this goes without trauma for their children or for their... So now, let's say from 2000 to 2022, you have a 22-year-old that went through that, but you also have 22 million families that are split. You have 44 million people who are suffering from divorce trauma, right? Anyways, I don't want to, we may talk about that some other night, but to come back to what you said, I agree. We need professional help. JawadQazwini is not going to be able to give you professional help. He can listen. He can give you some Islamic perspective. He can tell you how to eliminate childhood trauma for your children, to how to be a good parent, how to correct some of your mistakes to the best of his abilities. And by JawadQazwini, I don't just mean me, I mean a religious...
Let's try that again on. Yeah.
I mean a religious figure, right? But you need to go to a professional. I mean, this guy, this person, this young man, this young woman has gone through proper schooling, education, case by case, and now they can help you. Now, another thing is I feel that our community don't trust... Okay, I'll tell you what I mean. They may trust you as a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but they're afraid that you may go and share their stories.
Violate confidentiality.
Exactly. And we both know what happens, unfortunately.
Yeah. You know, I'll tell you, I think that it may be more of an issue outside the Western areas where there are laws that are very prohibitive against that kind of behavior and people taking oath for that, perhaps. We have about a minute or so left.
I want to mention one more thing, and I want to hear your take on this. Childhood trauma, do you think it plays a role with believing and practicing religion?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I believe a lot of kids that come to me, and you tell me your take, a lot of kids that come to me, and by kid I don't mean like 5-year-olds, no, I mean 20, 16 to 30, 35 years old. They come to me and say, a young man or woman, I don't believe in God, or I don't like Islam, or I don't recognize myself as a Muslim. In fact, Pew did a research about this, and they came up with 27%. 27% of American-born Muslims, by the time they become teenagers, they do not identify themselves as Muslims. Now, we're sitting there still talking about the most irrelevant things, and 27% of our population is leaving their religion and stuff. When I get into a discussion with them, what I can kind of find is that the parents were the authority in their lives, and they abused their authority. I mean, like the house was a boot camp, a lot of abuse, okay, whether it's verbal abuse, whether it's physical abuse, whatever it was, just a lot of mistakes, right? Now, God is also an authority. Because they feel that this authority has been so detrimental in my life, why would I want another authority? And most probably, every time the parents abuse them, they use God.
Yeah.
Even in non-religious families, it's very, very, very funny. There's a comedian that says, my grandma used to take me as a child to the casino and say, before you basically pull the, whatever it's called, the slot machine, you have to do a salawat. So he said, as a child, I was telling her, listen, this is wrong. I mean, God doesn't want us to be here. And he said, when I would do it, and I wouldn't say salawat, she'd be so upset. It's like, this is why we lost, right? So, jokes aside, do you think that, a lot of our unfortunate, Islam, Muslim atheist movement, anti-Islam movement, not identity, does that have to do with childhood trauma?
I don't know. And to be honest, I don't know. But that is worth discussing as to how parents deal with these questions that come up. What's traditionally would be done. For example, if your child came up and said, I want a tattoo, and if you're from a very traditional family, you absolutely have one reaction, whereas as a parent who needs to keep your child in a way that healthy and non-traumatic, might have a very discussion. So some of these perhaps need to be brought up more. So in the interest of time, though, we're past a couple minutes, and I want to really say thank you to everyone for bearing with us with our technical difficulties, which is a perennial thing. I think if everything was perfect tomorrow, it would be shocking. So let's just hope for the best here. I want to give a quick shout out to our helpers, Ali and where are you, Musa? There you are. Thank you very much. Who've been helping us control that part of it. And inshallah, we'll plan to be back tomorrow with a similarly interesting topic, which we expect to post shortly.
Yes, absolutely.
So
Now it's time to talk about
food?
Food.
Yeah, I thought so.
What do you crave today?
Chinese food.
Chinese food?
Chinese.
You?
Sushi.
Sushi.
Oh,
Really?
God.
Sushi.
It's pretty close.
Oh, that's pretty good, yeah. Well, thank you very much, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. Say it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.